Hi, I'm Sarah Klein, part of the FIASI Board of Directors and the Bloomberg Index team. Today I'm here with Dr. William Sharpe, Nobel Prize winning economist, originator of the capital asset pricing model, and also the Sharpe ratio. Dr. Sharpe, it's an honor to be here with you today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So tell me, how did you first become interested in economics and finance?
I'll try to make the story as short as I can. My mother wanted me to be a doctor, so I went to UC Berkeley in a pre-med, if you will, program chemistry physics as my freshman year. And I decided I really didn't like the sight of blood, so I transferred to UCLA and declared a business major. And the first semester as a business major, I had to take accounting and economics. And in that era, there was no economics in the high schools. So I knew nothing about economics. But I concluded very quickly that I did not want to be a businessman because I didn't want to take another accounting course. And I loved economics. It was just so wonderful. And so that's when I made the decision. I had no notion what I would do for a living, but I didn't care.
That's great. And how did that lead to the development of the capital asset pricing model?
Well, that's a long story. I finished my bachelor's in economics, applied for jobs in banks, and the typical interviewer would look at my record and say, I see you've got very good grades. And I would say, oh, that's wonderful. And then he, and it was always a he, would say, well, why don't you go to graduate school instead of working at my bank? So I thought, all right, I'll go to graduate school. So I took a master's degree. Then I had to go in the service. Then I went to work at Rand. And then I took my PhD sort of part-time.
Okay. So I have to ask, since this doesn't happen to most people, what was it like in the process leading up to the Nobel Prize and actually getting the phone call from Sweden in the middle of the night? What was it like to receive the Nobel Prize?
Well, the first question is easy, leading up to it. I think most of us in finance, or financial economics, had concluded that the prize committee was not going to include our work in the field of economics. So I didn't think about Nobel Prize at all leading up. So it was a total surprise, honest. And then it was crazy. With all the things that are entailed, and my wife and I had a little consulting firm at the time, so we had work to do, but you have to prepare a very important paper to be given in December. You learn in October, and all kinds of things are happening. But one of the things that is always good is that when you get back into real life, your colleagues give you no more or less attention than they would have otherwise. Yeah, fine, okay, good.
No special treatment after that.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, there's one advantage. Before the prize, I would get calls saying, would you be interested in coming and speaking at this conference on X? And after the prize, the calls are, would you be willing to come to this conference and speak about whatever you want to speak about? It's a big plus.
All right, so, most of us don't have any famous ratios named after ourselves. What is it like having the Sharpe ratio and sort of the legacy of that being taught in economics classes and discussed into the future?
Two things I would say. First, I did not call it the Sharpe ratio. I called it, and I still think this is a better term, the reward to variability ratio. It's the reward in the numerator and measure of variability in the denominator. So that said, it's kind of nice to go to a nonprofit investment committee board meeting, of which I'm on 3 now, and find the consultant having tables and Sharpe ratios for these managers or such and so. But I would say, I often say, look, the Sharpe ratio, if you just get one number, the Sharpe ratio is probably not a bad number. But here we have computers now. You don't have to encapsulate performance of a manager or a fund in one number. And you can be much more sophisticated. So in that sense, I guess I'm not a fan.
So you've done quite a bit of research on retirement income analysis. What's your view on the traditions of retirement planning in the U.S.? What can individuals do differently, and do we need policy changes?
Well, I think what little contact I've had with people who help retirees with their financial life, it's pretty simplistic. I've had more than one. I've asked them, well, what do you do? Do you start by talking to the client about longevity and showing them maybe a bar graph of the probability that they or their partner or wife or husband will be alive at various times? And how do you incorporate that and trade off annuities versus investment? And the answer I get from traditional financial advisors is, well, we just assume they're going to live to 100 and plan accordingly, which of course is fine if you've got a lot of money. But for the average person, or maybe more fortunate than average but not really wealthy, that's too simplistic. But nobody wants to talk about dying.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get people to even focus on even the probabilities. But without that, you really can't get a good handle on it.
What is your outlook for the economic future? Do you think that the old models still hold? Do you think we need new models?
I'm a financial economist, and so I don't try to predict the financial markets, and I'm certainly not a macroeconomist or monetary economist, so I don't try to predict. Somebody, Bernard Baruch, I think it was, said, well, what is your view on the markets? And his answer was, it will fluctuate.
So as part of the index team at Bloomberg, I'm very aware of the additional focus that indices are receiving with the growth of passive investing. What is your perspective on the future of that? Do you think that the trend will continue?
Well, I know from almost the beginning, there's been this nagging concern, somebody's got to do active management or the prices won't be appropriately set relative to the range of possible future outcomes. So, so that is a concern, has been a concern. It doesn't feel to most of us, I think, in the academy, as if it's an issue yet. When it might be an issue, how we would know, very hard to say. But I think certainly for middle income folks, index funds are really the way to go. Really low cost, and it's just easy, and you've got the diversification. And as long as somebody's out there trying to find things that they feel are mispriced and causing things not to be particularly mispriced or blatantly so, then I think indexing remains very much the way to go for middle income people, 401k plan people, retirees, etc.
And most people, when they think of benchmarks that include both stocks and bonds, most of the time this is a composite. It's a percentage stocks, a percentage bonds. We've been talking about maybe the potential for a capital markets index that would look at a company more holistically and include all of the debt and all of the equity of certain companies. What's your view on that? Is that something that has potential?
Well, in a slightly different form, I'm very sympathetic. I have argued for some time, and this is particularly true for retirement savings and for retirees, that when you think of the market, you really ought to think about not only stocks, but also bonds, at least risky bonds. And so a mix of bonds and stocks really, in many ways, ought to be the default. Obviously, depending on your risk tolerance, you might go more to stocks or more to bonds. But some mix of the two types of instrument. So I think I would not, your suggestion is to build it up from the company level, and that would be fine too, but I would not focus on this company's bonds and stocks versus that company's bonds and stocks. I'd rather focus on an index fund that has bonds and stocks from many companies.
More all-inclusive of the market.
Yes, yeah, because why should it make a difference in what my exposure to company XYZ is if they choose to change their bond stock issuance mix? You know, it's the company I want to be exposed to. So I'm very sympathetic to the idea.
Great. All right, well, thank you so much for spending the time with us here today. It's an honor to talk with you.
My great pleasure. Thank you very much for your interest.